So welcome everybody today to the Bonar Law Commons. We're going to be talking about, how to grow a lot of food on the cheap. So we're going to be looking at ways of maintaining soil fertility without spending large amounts of money, using the way nature makes soil. So if we look into nature, where does soil come from, right? So here, if you look on the ground over here, you see some leaves that fell to the ground. Basically, that's what happens. Birds come in, do a little bit of poopsies, it falls on the ground. Leaves in the fall fall to the ground. Grasses, tall grasses die down in the fall. They sit on the soil surface, they decompose. And that's how nature sets up soil. That's how soil likes to consume organic matter. That's how soil likes to feed. I like to think of soil like it's a living organism composed by a multitude of different small organisms, including bacterias, mushrooms, earthworms, and there's a whole host of different organisms that work together. It's like a colony, it's like a community of different organisms collaborating together to create that soil fertility. In the modern world, we like to grow food using chemical fertilizers and different products like that because we try to bypass the way nature does things and immediately go and feed the plant. But instead, in traditional farming and agriculture, you're not feeding the plant, you're feeding the soil. Then all of those soil organisms, they feed your plants. And doing it that way, you're not tying up a lot of your resources, a lot of your bags full of chemical fertilizers and stuff like that always have you coming back to buy more. If we use the way nature makes soil, the soil is not a fertilizer, it's a soil amendment. So in nature, what do? You see animal manures in the woodlands. You look at a forest, right? Nobody's tilling the soil over there. Nobody's amending it. Nobody's, trying to fertilize the soil in the forest. Yet the trees grow, to be dozens of feet tall, lush, beautiful, very, very fertile. Because every year they drop some leaves on the soil surface. They're populated by innumerable numbers of birds who are each contributing their each little packet of, little packets of goodness that and contributes to the soil's life, life biome. So when we're talking about soil organic matter, right? So here we the soil has been tilled and we see that it's a little bit pale, right? So that tells me that there's not a whole lot of organic matter in there. But what's organic matter? It's those organisms. They're dark in color. They're full of carbon. Atmospheric carbon that's coming out of the atmosphere, that's actually what trees are made of. The volume, the mass of a tree is mostly water and carbon, a little bit of nutrients. So when we add organic carbon to the soil, we add manures, we add compost, we add peat moss, we add all of those organic materials to the soil that hold water, that retain water, and creates an environment where those soil-borne organisms work together to create that fertility, those conditions that make soil amenable for plant growth. So you want water to infiltrate easily into your soil, right? And that's one of the big problems that we have with a lot of our gardens. You water your garden daily and the water doesn't infiltrate very deep at all. On a hot day, by noon, if you water in the morning, by noon, your water's all gone. Your plant is still suffering because your water can't infiltrate. You need that soil structure that the old timers used to talk about, soil structure. Well, soil structure is those tunnels that earthworms make. They open up passageways, waterways, airways so that air and water can infiltrate deeper into the soil. So when it rains, it actually infiltrates nice and deep. You don't want your soil to stay at the first quarter inch on your soil surface. You want it to go down 5, 6, 7, 8 inches if you can, right? Deep watering. The first half inch is going to dry off. But if you got that water nice and deep, then the plant has a stable source of water. It doesn't get stressed in midday, the hottest part of our day, between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Right? So that's when the plants are really going to suffer. If they don't have enough water, that's where you're going to see the leaves all wilting and kind of your plant is struggling and it's like, oh, please give me a little bit of water. And that's what it's missing. It's that soil organic matter that retains water, that enhances the conditions so that earthworms and other bugs and little critters go in there and they make your little open passageways so that water and that air can get in down deep. Earthworms breathe air just like you and me. So if there's no structure, there's no open passages, they have a hard time living deeper in the soil layers, right? So what happens there is with that rich soil structure, roots grow in along those tunnels. So the water goes down those tunnels. Well, roots follow that water and they go that much deeper. So you get that much stronger, deeper roots that hold the plant stronger when there's winds, when there's storms. It blows the plant side to side. So with deeper roots, it's more strongly anchored into your soil. We have wind here. One of the beauties of living next to in the estuary here, the Rishabuktu River, and very close to the ocean, Northumberland Strait, we get a lot of wind. And so for tall plants, you got your corn and your sunflowers and all of those things, the wind can really knock them down very reasonably easily. But with a better soil structure, they anchor a little bit better, the roots reach a little bit deeper, and they're more resilient against the conditions that they're trying to grow in here. So one of the things that we do is we till soil, right? You want to prepare the soil for the garden. But I don't recommend tilling every year. There's a lot of work involved when you till your soil. You have to you till it all up. You have to either get out there with your tiller and do the manual labor with your tiller, or you hire somebody with a tractor that comes in and, spend some gas. And so it's money out of your pocket, for the fuel, for the tiller, for the fellow to come in to do the work and all of that stuff. That's budget that's coming out of your pocket. When instead you till it once, you amend the soil with a lot of organic matter, and then you grow. In the fall, I found that the most efficient thing to do is just to cover the whole garden bed with a tarp. So that way we're preventing weed seeds from falling on top. It's the fall, right? So the weed seeds, they sit on top of a tarp, they're not rooting, they're not going to be a problem. If there are weed seeds under the tarp, come springtime, they're going to sprout in the darkness underneath the tarp because it's warm, but there's no sunlight. So the weed seeds kind of grow, they spend all their energy, there's no sunlight, they're gone. And usually there's a long time wait before, all of the plants, all of the weeds, everything have been growing since early spring, since everything all melted. Our garden is not yet planted. So that's a whole period of time where the garden is vulnerable to all of those weeds and the growth and all of that stuff. So you have to come in and amend it. But if you have it covered with a tarp until the day you go to plant your garden, all it is 5 minutes, you take the tarp off, your garden bed is already made. Just go in with your hoe and fix little holes and dips and stuff, even things out with a rake, and plant immediately. Within a half hour, you've already got a garden bed planted. And that's all the labor that's involved in your springtime prep for your garden bed. So I recommend, you make your big garden beds, you divide it up however that you want to do it. I recommend a garden bed where when you go in to work your garden bed, that you can reach up to the middle of the garden bed. So, you know, that depends on each individual person. Taller people can have wider garden beds. Shorter people would have narrower garden beds. It's not the shape and size of the bed that's good for the plant. It's what's good for you. That's your space. And when you make a wide garden bed instead of single rows, you have more garden space. Because what happens with a single row, you've got a row 1 foot wide, and then you have a 24 to 30 inch walkway beside it. That's not productive. That space for us, we're not plants, right? We're not growing food. We just have that tiny little garden space. So, you know, you have that little row, then you have another walkway, another little row, another walkway, another little row. But if you have a 36-inch wide garden bed, that's 3 garden rows put together without those walkways. So if you do the math, you're getting almost twice as much growing space by eliminating all of those walkways in between each individual garden row. So, you know, you get more productivity for the same effort. So that's worthwhile as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, you can set it up like narrow strips of tarp to cover your garden beds, just wide enough. You can buy them 5 foot wide. So if you have a 40-inch garden bed, you know, you can have a 48-inch, you know, tarp will cover that up 4 or 5 feet wide. And just make sure you have some rocks. Rocks are not a bad thing to keep around the garden bed for a couple of reasons. A, you can hold down tarps or frost blankets early in the season. It's nice to have a couple of frost blankets for protection. We live in New Brunswick. Can't predict the weather, right? It's beautiful today. We might have hail tomorrow. Who knows, right? So a little bit of protection, a little bit of a frost blanket is a worthy investment. If you don't have a frost blanket, a sheet will do, a curtain, you know, any thin piece of fabric will protect your young seedlings in the spring, and your tomatoes that are trying to ripen in the fall. If you have a sudden frost, you can just cover your plant with a piece of fabric like that, protecting from frost. You know, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be just like right basic. I know at our place, when we don't have enough frost blankets to cover all of our stuff, well, all the bed sheets go out, we take the curtains down off the curtain rods, we bring everything out, you know, we set everything up. We don't care because, you know, I want to have my fresh tomatoes. I want to have corn on the cob, you know, in the middle of a snowstorm in February, because it makes me feel better, right? And that's a big part of what gardening is all about, right? Finding ways of having an enjoyable and pleasant experience. You shouldn't have to work really, really hard. There's some work, but you don't want to, you know, multiply your work needlessly. There are ways of saving that kind of work. Like I said, those setting up tarps instead of tilling every year, remaking your garden beds every season, you know, it's a lot of work in the spring. Sometimes, you know, you have to wait because it's rainy, right? And if you till like that, you have to wait till you're able to bring the machine in there because it might bog down in early spring, you know, but that limits when you can plant certain things. Onions, for instance. With onions, it's a race in the spring. You want to plant your onions as early as you can in the spring. In March. I plant my onions in March. Well, you can't till your garden in that early in the season because it's just a big bog. You know, you end up with your tractor bogged down in the middle of your thing, and you got a tractor as a lawn ornament now, right? So that's not what you want. But if you plant your onions and you can put in your peas at that time of year as well with a little bit of protection, you know, you can really get a jump start on your season. The trick with onions, in order for them to bulb, they start bulbing as soon as we hit the first day of summer, the longest day of the year. And after that, the days start to shorten. That's what triggers the onion to make its bulb. So in the springtime, it's a race to get the onion to grow as many leaves as it can, right? So the more leaves, each leaf on an onion represents a different ring inside that onion. So the more leaves you have, the bigger that onion has a potential to grow. So if we plant your onions late in the summer, you only have a few weeks now before, you know, your first day of summer. You have 6 weeks, 6 weeks before your first day of summer. Well, your onion's just not going to have what it needs in order to get that big giant bulb. I recommend, if you guys want to grow big onions, get global onions, plant them inside in February. You know, you plant them in little seed trays. You can just fill up a whole seed tray, not into little pots, a whole seed tray. Sprinkle them up. They grow like lawn. You divide them up, put them out in March, you know, early May, maybe at the latest. And by August, you'll have giant size onions that are going to be the envy of all your neighbors. Just a little pointer for you guys today, right?
Is that an onion set or the actual seeds?
Seeds. You want big onions? Forget the sets. Go for seeds. They're available by Vessi Seeds. Yeah. I've been growing them for a few years now, and goodness, they taste great. But even better is when my gardener friends come over to my place and they take a look at those giant big onions on my garden, and the look of envy, that's worth it to me. Right? So, you know, early, doing a less or minimal till can open up these opportunities for longer growing seasons, because you don't have to wait because your machine can't get into your garden in the season when your plants should be going into your garden. Never mind the machine. Sometimes machinery just gets in the way, makes things more complicated, more expensive than it really needs to be. Nature doesn't do these things, and there's a reason why. Nature's had, you know, 4.5 billion years of research and development. Nature knows how to do these things. So if we pay attention, we learn from the way nature does things, we're really going to simplify and really make a much more enjoyable and pleasant experience in gardening. And if we have young people, you know, sometimes we bring our little ones into the garden with us. Well, if it's, you know, it's all drudgery and it's just, oh, we're weeding all the time, it's hot, it sucks, I don't like it, I don't want a garden. You know, you don't want to ruin it for our young people. We want to show them the bounty and the beauty that comes from gardening, and the goodness that comes to the spirit, and the nutrition that comes out of that, right? We want to give them a good experience. So minimal tillage. Tilling is only something you do to correct a severe problem. Low organic matter, for instance. You till once, you let it sit for a bit, you cover it with manure. A lot of manure. Compost, peat moss, any organic matter that you can bring in there. Well-rotted manure is the best. That's what nature's always made soil out of. Back in the days of the dinosaurs, you know, imagine a great big brontosaurus, right, with a great big multi-ton gut that it's got. You know, when it drops packet, shall we say, on the ground, you know, it could be a great big pile, right? Well, that's a compost pile. When we make a compost pile, that's what we're simulating. We're imitating the digestive tract of a dinosaur or a mastodon or a cow or a deer, right? So when you look in our woodlands, who's fertilizing the forest? It's your squirrels, it's your deer, it's your moose, it's your bears, right? A lot of birds, enormous numbers of birds. So all of your wealth and your richness for your soil, that's where it comes from. It's the interaction and the play between the animals, the plants, and the earth, right? It's an ecosystem. It's a symbiotic relationship. And as gardeners, if we see ourselves as part of that symbiotic relationship, and we understand the dynamics of those relationships and employ the resources at hand that make that work, we save ourselves so much work. So that way we spend more time growing food and less time trying to get it to grow, right? And that's such an important part of gardening, you know. So what I usually do, you know, I'll set up a soil, I'll amend it, and I'll feed it on the surface. Like, it's just been tilled, we can add a lot and as much manure as you can get in there. The more possible, the better. You till it in, and then you shape your garden beds. And then what I like to do is I like to come in after and put like a 2 or 3 inch layer of compost at the surface. And from that point on, That's all you do for your soil. You just add a 2 or 3 inch layer of compost at the surface per year is all you need to maintain a very rich, a very fertile and productive soil perpetually, right? You don't have to you don't have to dig it in, you don't have to till it, you don't have to do anything to it. The soil organisms are used to coming up from below and eating it from underneath that layer of compost, and then they go up and down, they create those tunnels, and they're building that structure. And if you are not tilling it every year, that structure, those tunnels remain. And one very important element that comes into our garden then when you're not tilling is mushrooms. The mycelial network of mushrooms are one of the most valuable allies that the gardener has in our garden. Mushrooms can take and they can digest pretty much anything. They can digest wood, rock, earth, all kinds of minerals, and they have networks that reach out for kilometers around. And they share those nutrients with one another, and they share it with plants. A mushroom can't make sugar, but it needs sugar to live. So it gives nutrients to plants, and the plant gives it sugar. In the root zone of plants, they're not just absorbing stuff, they're also putting out sugars in the form of carbon. Those sugars are, all living organisms, all living tissues, everything is all built out of carbon. So plants put out that carbon-rich sugar into the soil. It feeds the mushrooms. The mushrooms come in and they see all of these structures in the soil, and they'll glue it together. They create this substance called a glomalin. So one thing we're looking for when we're building soil structure is building those clumps of soil. We want the soil clumps to agglomerate into little pieces of chunks, right? So that's what holds nutrients stable in your soil. When you don't have good soil structure and you don't have mushrooms in there, all the nutrients that you have in your soil, and I'm sorry to say a lot of commercial farmers, they'll put in their fertilizers in there. There's nothing in the soil to hold it there, so the next rain, a lot of it washes away. Ends up in the river, contaminates the river, and it creates dead zones outside the estuaries, outside, waterways, especially in heavy agricultural areas. It's a huge problem. And for me, it's a huge problem, not just because it's an environmental issue. It's a problem because it's resources and money that the farmer is spending on maintaining soil fertility that's washing away. That's that farmer's retirement plan washing away. And I want to see farmers thrive. I want to see agricultural people, have a solid future and build up their own wealth, their productivity. I want to see those nutrients stay on garden soil, enhancing plant growth and making, filling bellies and soothing souls. Because that's what it's there for, right? So that's why I encourage people to reduce how much you till, treat your soil like it's a living organism whose mouth is at the surface. So that's where you feed it, at the soil surface, and you maintain that. You cover it up in the fall before all of the weed seeds come down on top of it. As soon as you're done harvesting your thing, immediately when a garden bed is done for the season, cover it up. Add some fresh manure, some fresh compost, cover it up until next spring when you're ready to go plant again. And that's really all the work it takes. You don't have to have a whole team, especially with community gardens. Sometimes it's hard to get enough volunteers to do the labor like that when you have to till and you have to do all of these things and weed things out, and there's a whole bunch of work involved, But if you reduce how much of that work is there, that's less hours from volunteers that you need to try to drum up interest and try to bribe people to come on over and to, do a lot of that work. So like that, it's like my place, usually what I'll do is I'll build my garden beds. I take all of the soil out of the walkways. Where I do have walkways, I take all that topsoil and I put it on top of my garden bed. And I replace that topsoil in the walkways with shredded leaves because it's abundant. I have lots of it. Every fall, people are very kind. They fill up these bags of leaves and they put them up at the road. And it's so convenient. Just drive by, just pitch it in the back of the truck and go home. You know, I raise chickens, so I use a lot of those leaves as chicken bedding. Chickens are jungle creatures. They're forest creatures. They're used to walking on leaves. That's what makes their feet happy and healthy. So I use fall leaves. I'll collect 300-400 bags every year. And, you know, half of that goes for the chicken coop. The other half goes into my walkways in my garden beds. I'll run a lawnmower over them, shred them nice and small. Because if the leaves are big and they catch a lot of wind, then they tend to fly off in our windstorms, right? So when you shred it, it has less of a tendency to do that. I find if wind is particularly strong, a nice little layer of straw on top will hold them in place. It doesn't have to be very thick, but just, you know, something wide, long and thin that's not going to pick up on the wind and fly off. You know, and that's all you really need to do. What happens then is that your walkway is mulched with exactly the thing that soil likes to eat, to consume. A lot of our places here, we have heavy clay. There's some areas with sand, some areas with heavy clay. For those of us who have heavy clay, you've got night crawlers living in there. So when you put leaves on clay soil, night crawlers live in there. And you want to talk about an ally in keeping your soil healthy and happy and alive is night crawlers, right? Because they make these giant tunnels, a lot of air coming down. And they make those tunnels down 4 feet down underground below the frost layer in the winter months. So that's how deep your water and your air is able to infiltrate into your soil. So when it rains, that water, there's a bank of water underneath the soil under your garden bed. So by the time August comes around, we have our big drought. Well, you know, you got that bank, that reserve that's percolating up. It's kind of, you know, through like a wicking action. It comes up in your soil, in the soil column, and it maintains that moisture that the plant requires, when otherwise it would depend on you to come over there with a can and water at the top and then have the sun come in and evaporate most of it off. So my walkways, I mulch with leaves. If you have access to wood chips, that's good too. But be very careful not to till wood chips into your soil. Wood chips are great for keeping down weeds and holding moisture and all of that stuff. But when you till it into soil, the soil organisms that are there to digest it and make it decompose it, they need nitrogen in order to do that. So what happens? It locks up the nitrogen in your soil, and then leaves don't want to grow. And it can take 3-4 years before that's done for, and then you're able to grow again. You know, nitrogen is what leaves or plants use to make leaves. So if your nitrogen is locked up, trying to decompose pieces of wood, it's not such a good idea. Leaves is not such a big problem for that. That's why I like using leaves. Garden paths and around perennials, that's where I prefer to use wood mulches, right? Because there you're not going to be digging so much, you know, because your perennials, you don't want to disturb their roots. So that's where you put your wood chips, bark chips, and all of that stuff. In the garden, you want annual organic matter because it decomposes that much quicker. It's not going to lock up nitrogen in your soil for 4 years. You know, you're going to have, you know, a shorter time before that's decomposed and contributing to the nutrients available in your soil. And something else that's very important is mulching around your plants. Bare soil bleeds water. So you want to make sure that your soil is never bare. Mother Earth is a lady. We need to keep her covered, right? We don't want to leave her bare. So we're right next to the estuary right here. So what have you got in here? Seaweed, eelgrass. It's a wonderful mulch. There's no weed seeds in there. There's nothing that's going to harm your plants. Some people worry about the salt content. The salt is on the eelgrass, but not in the eelgrass. So typically what happens is that there's a storm, there's a surge, there's currents, it breaks up the plant matter, the eelgrass accumulates on the beach. During a rainstorm, it washes off the salt. So when you come in and you collect it, there's a minimal amount of salt, not enough to harm your plants, but enough to bother slugs, right? So for me, it's a huge addition that I bring in to my garden bed. Eelgrass and anything that comes out of the ocean is so full of nutrients. There are nutrients that are dissolved in ocean water that are not available on land. One of them in particular, one example I like to use is iodine. So iodine is a very important nutrient, particularly in the development of small children. You need iodine in order to develop intellectually. Iodine deficiencies lead to, intellectual developmental issues. That's why they put iodine in table salt to make sure that people who don't live close to the coast, most of us do, but inside the continent, there's less access, there's less iodine in the environment. So by adding, by government agents, add iodine to table salt, they ensure that everybody has enough iodine in part of their diet so that you don't have the developmental issues. This was discovered during the First and Second World War. They would test, people and try to, to get recruits and stuff like that. They need people to have at least a certain, capability. And they noticed that, geographically, there were certain areas that had a little bit more higher number of people that are having a little bit more struggle. It's that lack of iodine. But when we use eelgrass in our garden with that iodine and boron and all kinds of other micronutrients that we need for our health, and the plants also need for their health, in small amounts, microscopic amounts, right? But it has to be there. And when you bring that eelgrass and a seafood compost, and you can a lot of folks will take. We do a lot of fishing around here, so sometimes folks will go and take all of their fish guts and the bones and all that stuff and put that in their compost. Well, that also has a lot of those nutrients that are coming out of the ocean, and that contributes to the soil, to the gamut of nutrients that are available in your garden soil. So building your compost, out of as wide a variety of ingredients as possible is one of the great ways of maintaining your soil health. So collecting all of those different ingredients, going out and getting manure from this farmer, getting some seaweed from the beach over here, getting some leaves from this tree and that tree that lives in that environment, maybe raking up some detritus underneath in a woodland over here. Bring all of those things together in your compost. Get a wide nutrient profile, and your soil in your garden will always produce an abundant crop because it has everything that it needs. So when you're making compost, collect as much stuff as you can from as wide a variety as you can. Partner up with your local farmers. Our farmers, they raise chickens, they raise goats, they raise cows, they raise horses. All of the manures that are coming out of all of these producers, oftentimes are a waste product and are a problem for these farmers. And some farmers are really smart and figure out, well, I shouldn't say some farmers, every farmer is a very smart person. They're some of the most valuable people that we have on this world. But some of them have figured out that manure is not a waste product. It's an additional product that you have on your farm that you can sell. It's, another income stream. And, when you partner up with your farmers like that, come in, collect that stuff, give them a little something in return, make sure that they get compensated properly for that valuable, rich manure that's going to make your garden grow. When I collect leaves in the fall like that, I'll oftentimes bring an extra bag of garbage bags, and I'll leave it in the mailbox, as a courtesy to these people who spent their day raking up and cleaning up their yard, and they put all of that at the road, and I take advantage of their labor and I bring it home. Well, it's only courteous, to thank them a little bit. You put a little bit of resources and your money into producing this for me. Well, thank you. And here's a bag of garbage bags. That's what it costs you to do this. Well, I'll compensate you for that. Be fair, be kind. Kindness is part of the moral standing of gardeners. We're nurturers. We make sure that the conditions are correct, are right. We try to to form the world for that plant, so the plant can thrive. But not only that, for that plant to thrive, you know, that the product that coming off of that plant makes our families thrive. And, you know, we produce a lot of our own food, highly nutritious. There's no higher quality food and no better priced food than the one that grows within walking distance of your table, right? So, you know, this is all part of the ethics of gardening. We take care of the land takes care of us, we take care of each other. We don't grow just to feed ourselves, we grow food to feed our families, our friends, our neighbors. You know, anybody who's ever grown zucchinis always has a surplus of zucchinis, and you're always trying to pass off zucchinis to everybody you know, right? And but that's just the way it is, right? Sometimes you have too many tomatoes. I mean, you ran out of mason jars, you can't make any more salsa or tomato sauce. What are you going to do? Well, geez, that neighbor's really got a productive cucumber patch over there, and maybe I can give them some tomatoes and they can give me some cucumbers and I can make some pickles, right? So that's how these things work. And it makes, you know, being gardeners is being part of a community, is being part of a, you know, a society, and that is interrelated and binds each other together as a community, right? So that's a large part. You know, nature is very generous if we follow the rules that nature sets. And, you know, that's why sometimes Mother Nature requires a little humility. We have to kneel, work on the ground. Sometimes you can get our garden boxes. I think you were telling me a while ago that you can get garden boxes that are up off the ground. Those are basically the big pots. So they tend to dry off a little bit. So you have to put in a little extra effort in watering. But that's where, like, Mother Nature rewards you for kneeling. You know, the water's more stable in the soil that's on the ground than it is on the pot. But if you have mobility issues, bad back, bad knees, sometimes it's hard, right, to work, you know, on the ground. So those garden boxes really have a role to play in a lot of especially if you have, like, not a whole lot of room in your property. Like in municipalities, sometimes the yard's just not huge, it's not very big, and sometimes the soil might be contaminated. You don't know what happened there before. So sometimes, you know, a garden box above ground with soil that you brought in is the best solution. And the best solutions are the ones that work for you. There's not one way of gardening, there's not one right way. There is the way that works for you with the resources that you've got at hand, that works well for your lifestyle and your preferences. Every garden is different, just like every one of us is different. We're each unique, and our gardens should reflect that. You know, it's a method of expression. It's an art form. You know, it's just like music or painting. You know, it's a relationship with the land, and you're creating something that changes with time, that flowers, that creates character and beauty. It interacts with the bees and the birds and the wind will bring in all kinds of different things, and it creates a beautiful symphony on your property when you garden like that. And sometimes it's just really nice to just come out and sit after a long day's work, listen to the birds sing, right? And watch the plants grow, maybe nibble on a carrot or a fresh green bean. You know, like I said a while ago, gardening is, you know, it's feeding your soul as much as it is feeding your body, right? And that's that big part of the harvest, is that experience of being part of something bigger than we are. It's a relationship. You know, you take care of the land takes care of you. You're able to take care of your loved ones with that. You know, it's interrelated. It's just a beautiful, beautiful symphony. So today I brought a little prop. I bet you thought I was going to make a bunch of hoe jokes, eh? You were right. So, the hoe, right? Kneeling sucks. Like, I'm 50 plus years old now. I'm a little heavy, so my knees are not the best. I don't like to kneel and do a lot of weeding. So that's why I recommend a while ago, using mulches and things reduce the amount of weeding you need to do. If you have bare soil, a weed's going to fill it in. That's what nature does. On the ground here, you'll never see bare spots. If there's a bare spot, it doesn't take long. A plant comes in, a weed grows, something fills that space. If you try to keep bare soil in your garden, you're always going to struggle against that characteristic of soil, right? Nature considers bare soil a wound, and it wants to heal it, and that's how it heals. Plants grow. So plant your plants really close together. And instead of kneeling, I mean, I like to use a hoe. This one here has a sharp edge right here. So basically you just come in and you just scrape it off and separate the plant from its roots. And then the bottom here, it's like a rake. And you can just pull that away. And, instead of kneeling, just long handled tools like that and just do your work going in, you got a little thing, you got some things in the way, don't kneel. Kneeling sucks. Leave that for young folk, right? Use your tools in a comfortable way, not bent over, don't work like that, because you're only going to be able to put in a couple of hours and then you're done for. And you're not really having fun when you're like that, right? It's not a pleasant experience. And also, being a heavy person, I like having a hoe that I can lean on, right? It kind of takes the weight off a little bit. And, makes things a little bit more pleasant around the garden. And sometimes, I drop a seed when I'm planting seeds, I'll dig a little trench like so. I'll pitch some seeds, and if I miss it, well, I can just take a seed and kind of put it in place, and voila. Instead of, getting down on all fours and really working hard, make the most ergonomic way of moving and using your tools and using your body in a way that it's not as hard on you physically, right? And also, when you're out gardening, be sure to protect yourself too. Don't just take care of the garden, you got to take care of yourself. So I recommend, a wide brimmed hat like myself, and the hairline is not as protecting my head so much. Sometimes the sun gets in there and you get cooked in no time, and it's not having fun anymore. And something else, sometimes, you're gardening and the bugs come out, right? So it's nice to have a little bit of protection, a little hood that you can put on top of your head. There you go, see? And you're ready to continue to work, and you have a long sleeve shirt, you're not getting bug bitten, you're a lot more comfortable. Wear pale colors when it's hot, wear dark colors when it's cold, and you'll be a lot more comfortable. So pale colors tend to reflect heat, dark colors absorb it. So if you're wearing a dark shirt in the middle of the midday sun, you're going to sweat, you're going to get tired, you're not going to have any stamina at all, it'll take no time at all, you're done for, you're going inside, you're looking for a tall glass of water and a pillow to go take a nap, right? But if you wear a pale, light fabric shirt that that flutters a little bit in the wind, you're able to work for a longer period of time, more comfortably. You're not going to have a sunburn. You're not going to burn your ears with that hat, burn your nose, protect your skin from the sunlight. If you spend a lot of time outdoors, well, skin cancer, melanomas is a real thing, and we want to prevent that as much as possible, right? So I want to make sure that you guys not only grow healthy food, but you grow healthy habits to make sure that you're protected and you stay healthy while you're doing this work in your garden bed, right? I don't need the net today because the bugs are courteous enough to give us some space today. They're not too bad. Except for you, I think you're having a little bit of an issue with some of these bugs, eh? The bugs have a preference they pick somebody in a crowd. I don't know what it is. Usually it's me. I'm sorry that it's you today, but but that's just the way they are, right? So like I said, pale colors, that's why my hat is in a pale color. It reflects a lot of the heat. It's kind of solid a little bit, so if there's a little bit of a sprinkle, I'm not so worried, and you're able to work comfortably, pace it out, take some breaks, rest out, make sure you have some water to drink while you're outside working for long periods of time. I prefer to work my garden early in the morning, One reason why specifically is because birdsong at dawn, there's something quiet in the air, something that makes the bird song just carry on the wind a little bit further. It's just the most lovely time of day. Everything's quiet. Nobody's mowing their lawn. Nobody's bothering you. Dogs aren't barking. It's just a beautiful, lovely time of day. And when you water your garden early in the morning, well, the water's there by the time the heat sets in. So, you know, you want to get ahead of that heat instead of letting your plants suffer through dehydration through the day and then maybe giving them some water at night. Then it'll absorb water, but you also encourage slugs to move into your garden beds, particularly if you have a lot of mulch, like I'm recommending. Sometimes you'll have some slugs. You water at night, well, you're just creating conditions that encourage slug reproduction, and that's not necessarily what we want to do. So watering early in the morning, sometimes setting up weeper hoses. If you have limited amount of time, just go out, turn your faucet on with a timer on it, let it run for an hour. The timer shuts off your hose. You know, so in the morning you get up, if you have a job, you get up, you turn your water on with the timer, you take off to work. You know your garden's getting watered while you're on your commute to work, right? And the water's going to turn off at a specific period of time. So you know you're not overwatering and you're not using up more water than you need to. So, you know, you want to, if you have soaker hoses, that works. What I do at home is my garden is on a slope that actually I've got one of the worst garden situations that a gardener could be dealt, really. I mean, it's a north facing slope, so all the north winds are coming in there. There's no south slope. I'm in the bottom of a valley, so cold air, frosts have a tendency to hit me while it's not hitting my neighbors. So these are all things that I have to contend with in my garden. So what I did is all my walkways, they're all level. So what happens when they're level ditches, I take out all that topsoil and I put it on the garden bed that's downhill from the walkway. When it rains, the rain accumulates in the walkways under my mulch, and it absorbs under the soil. And every garden bed going down that hill feeds into the next. So if I need to water that garden bed, I bring my hose on the very top of the very top walkway. I set the hose in the walkway, I turn it on, and I let it fill that garden bed. The walkway fills up, overflows, fills up the second one, overflows, fills up the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh. There's like 15 of them. And, you know, I might let it run all day long. I have a well. Actually, I don't have a well. I have a spring. I pipe water from a natural spring to my house. That's my water source. So I'm not taking water from fossil water underground. I've got surface water that's coming up that's always flowing whether I use it or not. So I'm not overusing water. It's not the same as like when you're in a municipality and you got a meter on your water and you got some limitations. So different conditions are a little different for depending what your situation is. So like I said, I'll set my hose in my garden path, let it overflow, and it fills up every garden bed down the row. But I might only need to do that once in a year. Usually like 2016, 2020, those were drought years. In 2020, when it was a huge drought, I watered my garden once in August. It's the only time I had to do that because I shaped my land to channel that water, to hold on to it jealously, and to not let it leave my garden. Water that comes to my garden stays there. The nutrients that are dissolved in that water stay in the garden, and they feed. If it overflows from one garden bed, it flows to the next one that's next downhill. So we're always catching that water, those nutrients, and we're never letting it go away from my garden. Channeling water, holding on to water is such an important aspect of gardening that sometimes we forget about that because we have a mentality in with engineering and city planning. We want to shed water, we want to get water away from the area. When we want to run a tiller, well, there's too much water. Water's a problem. Get the water out of there so we can get the tiller in there, get the tractor in there. But that's the wrong attitude to have when you're trying to fertilize soil, to make soil productive. You want that water. Water is a resource. Water is a treasure that you want to harvest as much of as possible. You want to capture water coming off of roofs, water that's flowing down a hillside next to your garden. If you can channel that into your garden bed, you know, that's what you want to do. Because that time, you know, from that point on, every time there's a little sprinkle, well, your garden is thriving. Right now, like you see here, you have it's been tilled. So you see here, it's got like a dry crust on top. That's what happens with tilled soil. You get a crust that's waterproof and airtight. And water doesn't want to filter through that, you know? So that's where your mulch, your compost at the soil surface won't let the soil do this. The soil will stay soluble, with able to absorb water. Just like a mop, you know? You want to mop the floor, or you spill something on the floor, you take a dry mop and you try to clean it up off the floor. What happens? You're just spreading the water around, but it's not absorbing in your dry mop. Your mop has to be moist. It's weird, but your mop has to be moist in order to absorb water. The soil is the same way. If it's dry, it won't absorb water, right? So you want to keep it as moist as possible. With that mulch on the surface, the soil is a little bit moist all the time, so water flows in easily. You don't get that crust, right? So that's what you were trying to do. You want to prevent that crust from forming, that 1/4 inch crust at the surface of dry soil. Dry powder is hydrophobic. I didn't bring the demonstration here, but usually I like to do a demonstration where I take flour and I take a loaf of bread. Okay, they're both made out of flour, but the loaf of bread was acted upon by a living organism. In this case, it's not soil organisms, but it's yeast. It created structure, creates open tunnels, open bubbles and stuff like that. And your flour is a nice, soft, smooth powder, like you imagine your garden is great. You know, you can stick your finger in there, drop a seed in there really easy. You imagine that roots can find their way in there and reach as deep as you can. But in reality, what happens is that your water falls on that flour, and it sits on top. Doesn't fall in, it doesn't absorb, it runs off the side, and often will make a mess on the side. It'll bring a little bit of that flour with it and just make a big puddle, a big nasty puddle. And that's what happens with our gardens. If you have a big garden box and you don't have as much soil as you'd like, sometimes what I like to do is I like to take logs of rotten wood, throw that in the bottom of your garden box, and then put soil on top. Your rotten wood acts like a big sponge, and it's a home for mushrooms. Mushrooms that's the reason why the wood is rotten, is because there's mushrooms that are living in it. So mushrooms will go in there, and they'll share those nutrients and that water with your plants, and it creates a moist, spongy bank of water right in the core of your garden bed. And it's less soil that you have to buy to put it in there, right? So, you know, I don't know who heats their home with firewood, but sometimes you order some firewood and some of it comes as pretty punky, and you don't necessarily want to bring it in the house because it might have bugs and things. Well, that's what I would put in that core of that garden bed. If there's a fallen log, an old log in the woodland, or something washes up on the beach, you know, you can put that in there, and that'll really replace a lot of that soil and save some space.